Welcome to the Things We Don't Talk About podcast with Alison Mulligan and Mike Hartley.
Hi everybody and welcome to the Things We Don't Talk About podcast. I'm Mike Hartley and as ever I am joined by my effervescent, wonderful co-host, the wonderful Alison Mulligan. And for today's episode, we are joined by Mr. Carl Cookson, Cookie himself, the legend, the man, the myth, the awesome one himself. Yeah, you are quite right, Alison. Round of applause. Cookie, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Alison. Wonderful to be here.
Lovely to have you.
It is wonderful. So let's dive straight into this. Depression. The thing is, there's no way you can kind of pussyfoot around this topic. It's one of those that you try and be gentle and sort of careful about it, but at the end of the day, it all boils down to struggles with mental health and the D word and things like that. And sometimes you kind of have to just say it as it is. And you've had a bit of a journey yourself, haven't you, Carl?
Yeah, and I think everyone has a journey with mental health, and people either don't see for what it is or are such characters that doesn't affect them. And a lot of the time with me personally, it was a journey through various stages of that depression, and I still struggle with negativity and negative thoughts today. And it started effectively when in my life and my role it was getting to that mundane and drudgery in moments, and then combined with that I lost my father, which at that point really took me to that into that downward spiral. And to understand what I was feeling and to recognize it took a long time. You were just plodding on and doing what you thought was right, and being snappy and being disruptive and being miserable, and you just thought that was the norm, that was the new normal that you were fighting against. And it took incidents and accidents and people around me to be strong and to recognize a difference in my character, to bring that out in me, to realize that I needed the help, I needed to talk to people, I needed the medication to put me back onto that even keel. And it was a struggle, and it was a time in my life that I look back on now and see that a lot has changed. But I'm hoping I've grown as a character to get through that and pitch my tent in different areas to make sure that I never go back into that world again.
Yeah. I mean, I know sort of my own experience. It's always a journey, and it's that. I mean, my personal experience, it was I kind of denied where I was headed, and it wasn't until kind of after a few days of me coming home from work and grabbing a very large whiskey every day before I'd even said hello to the kids. And then one day my wife turned around and goes, "You've got to go to the doctor. I think you've got a problem with depression." At which point it was just like the walls came crashing down on me. And I mean, that was 14 years ago now. And yeah, I still find myself heading down paths that I know I shouldn't sometimes. I think where we are with the pandemic has been very, very challenging for people with mental health. I know personally there have been points in the past year where I've probably been the closest to a breakdown that I've ever been in since 2007. So yeah, I mean, the thing I found for me was people around me picking up on some of the cues and then just coming round and supporting. I mean, was that kind of the same for you?
It was the people that you interact with every day. Starting with your family, obviously, and the people that are closest to you, but also your work colleagues and how you're interacting with them, and the way that they're interacting with you. You can see that change, and it was, for me, it was just doing a routine that got me down, and it's that personal way of understanding what you're thinking and the way that you're working, and to change that has been the biggest way of me coming to grips with it all, and knowing that it's a personal journey rather than everyone says, oh, just keep a routine, go and do something spontaneous. There's so many different ways of triggering it and getting out of it, that you've just got to realize it's personal to you, and everyone is going to be very different. Everyone is going to have a different approach to it. Everyone's going to have different effects on other people, and everyone's going to have different people reacting to them in a different way. So all of those things combined means it's a very personal journey, and it only takes one person within your group to trigger that understanding. And I think that's key for us as friends, as family of other people, is to recognize those symptoms and be brave and be understanding, to make sure that the person with depression comes out of it the other side and understands what help there is available, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's I sort of smiled at one point there, because when you said about it's your friends and your family just picking up and being able to help. Because I mean, for me last year, it was such an innocuous little moment, but I won't name the person because I don't want to embarrass them, but they picked up on the way I was talking in the WhatsApp groups, things like Badger. They picked up that I wasn't quite myself, and spontaneously they just WhatsApp me, how are you? 3 simple words that just came at the point where I was actually at the lowest point I was, and honestly I blubbed like a baby, and they followed it up with a phone call about half hour later, by which point I'd calmed down, and they thought they actually said, yeah, we kind of thought you might have had a reaction, which is why we waited. So yeah.
It is like that taking that plaster off, though, isn't it? It's you're just plastering over, and you're making everything fine, and then something will happen, and it will be a little thing like that was, or anything else, and it would suddenly reality kicks in, and your understanding of where you're at and an understanding in yourself will kick in. And I think that's true from a positive point of view and an encouragement point of view, as well as a negative point of view, to understand that someone's going through this, and the big thing really is to keep those lines of communication open and not be afraid to reach out effectively to anyone.
Yeah. And you've got a very different perspective on things, Alison. As always, because you made an interesting comment to me the other day that you have very robust mental health. So you see things from the other side of the equation, to kind of where Carl and I experience things. So what's kind of your experience of how you see these things?
Yeah, like it's super difficult for someone like me. Like I think like I've always had really robust mental health, and I'm not saying that I don't have my own schisms and weird behaviors and stuff like that. Definitely somewhere on the autism spectrum, because really I find it very difficult to be empathetic. Um, uh, Not because I don't care about people, I care about people very deeply, but I just it's not something that comes naturally. Somebody has to point out to me that someone else's behavior is not quite right. So I think the thing for me, my perspective is, I can't tell if someone's struggling. And if they say to me, I'm struggling, then my immediate answer, because I'm a natural problem solver, is to say, well, why don't you go and do something that you enjoy? Which is, as I am led to understand by many people, one of the worst things you can say. But I don't, because I don't have any understanding. I don't have any understanding of what it feels like. I've literally no frame of reference of what it feels like to be, in the grip of depression. And I have experience of living with people that suffer from depression, and there's different types of depression. Like there can be situational depression, or it can be like a chronic condition. But I think the perspective that we all have is that depression shouldn't be a four-letter word, right? It shouldn't be something that is, it shouldn't be considered any different to, having a knee injury or being diabetic or anything like that. It's just, it's a factual situation that you are dealing with, or a factual thing that you're dealing with in your life. And it's neither good or bad, it just is, right? And I think that's the point that I would like, but for me, I would like to be an ally for people, no matter what they're, no matter what someone's going through, whether it's about their mental health or gender or some other issue. I always want to be an ally, human to human, someone that is a human being who's there for another human being. But I just don't know how. And so because I don't know how, I say the wrong thing, or I say something stupid, and it comes from a nice place, right? It comes from a place of wanting to help, but I'm not helping, and I know I'm not helping, and then I just digging myself deeper. So for me, it would be really useful, like if there are certain things that I know that I could look for, or certain things that I know that I can say in certain situations, then that would help me a lot.
And I think that that's the whole point, isn't it? That we're evolving as a species, and being open about the effects of people and the different views and different, everything's different between people, whether it's sex, gender, race, etc. But it's always an education. So you always hope that my kids, my boys, will be more open with their mental feelings than I am, and my father and mother certainly was very never mentioned it. They never mentioned a lot of things, but mental health being one of them. And as we evolve as a species, and as we move away from into a different social way of working, we need to be aware of these things. And the pandemic has just rushed that journey ahead a lot with a lot of things. It's just, you realise that being cooped up in a house 7 days a week for the last year will have the strains on people in a way that you just didn't see. And it's just bringing those conversations to the forefront. And it's because we've not got the interactions that we did have. There's no coffee chats, there's no going to the pub, there's none of that interaction that we had, that we would possibly discuss it, but more importantly, have a break from what our routine is, and do something different that we just haven't been able to do in the last year.
And I think that's also actually a really interesting point in terms of the sort of in-person interactions, because of course if I had turned up at a user group and seen you, Alison, and I'd have been like complete eel wet blanket, you would have picked up on the fact that I wasn't me. Whereas sitting here now on a Teams meeting or a Zoom call or a WhatsApp chat, it's very easy, to kind of hide some of that stuff if you don't want it to be visible, but also it's so difficult for somebody on the outside to pick up on the cues that something isn't quite right and something, okay, what do I say?
Because we always put on that persona, right? We always put on that larger than life character, some of us larger than others, but it's in those quiet moments that you get when you're not interacting with people, but people can still see you, that really shines through when you've got a problem. And I think we've just lost that discussion, those interactions that weren't forced like this is, you know. And you can put that persona up, and you can put that persona up for half an hour, and then you can go back to your own way of thinking, and it's not so bad. But when you're in a user group, when you're in the office, etc., it's very difficult to hide compared to what we're doing now.
Yeah, it is. So I think it's one of those things where, I mean, you said, Alison, about not knowing what to say or how to say it or how to act. And it's a really tough one, because I think what would have helped you, Carl, and what would have helped me would be slightly different. And a lot of it can come out of relationship, but language is definitely a key part in how we approach these topics, and how we can come alongside people and just let them know that we're there. It's one of those where, when I was preparing for the Scottish Summit, I was giving it some thought, and I realised there is no positive language, and I'm being careful with my words. There's no positive language that you can use for mental health. It's mental health illness, it's struggling with mental health, it's mental health problems. And yes, it's all of those things, but that kind of frames the issues as the problem of the person who's dealing with it, rather than anything that anybody else can have a degree of almost sort of, struggling to find the words, just feeling that they've got a degree of ownership to an extent as well, and ownership's not the right word.
I think, like, I agree with you, and you and I have talked about this quite a lot, that there's no way of us describing mental health in a in a way that doesn't sound like it isn't positive. Like, there's no positive descriptions of it, and there's no way for us to refer to it. And like you were just saying, it kind of, it's almost as if the person is a sufferer, and they're a victim, and they have no agency over their own experience, right? And I think that's what we're all struggling with, is that it's everything about it feels like a labeling exercise, right? And I think that's wrong. And that was one of the main reasons that we wanted to have this podcast, really, was to say, like, you know, it's neither good nor bad, it just is, it's factual, you know, and we have to stop referring to it in negative or derogatory ways.
Yeah,
certainly. I think it is key that the more that we can talk about these things, and the more we can make it the norm that we're having conversations that are around these terms, the more it becomes part of the conscience. That, you know, that all of different problems with the world that have been solved by people talking about it. The Me Too movement is a classic one that just opened up that whole conversation and it became the norm, and that's where we've got to go with mental health. And I think we're getting there. It's certainly a lot better than 20 years ago when it was never mentioned. And
you mean back in the days when they just told you to push it down inside until it became a diamond?
Exactly. Swallow it down.
Yeah.
And you know, as a northerner, these sort of things just never, you know, it was just man up was the phrase, and that for me, okay, sexist, but even that is just not the way that people want to approach these things. It is just understanding that it is the same as any other illness, and has the same results in that you are impaired. You as a human being is impaired, and the more that you can see that you've got an impairment and you need to resolve that as much as possible, you've got to get to that point.
And I think, again, from the outsider perspective, or the person that hasn't had the experiences that you guys have had and many other people have had, I think my expectation is, like I said, I know there's different types of depression. Sometimes it's something situational, like the loss of a parent or a loved one or a dog. I can't imagine what a mess I'll be when one of my dogs goes. And sometimes it's something that you've been living with for a long time that's possibly caused by a chemical imbalance or something like that. And that is something that you need medication for, and there shouldn't be any stigma around this medication. You know, and likewise, even if it's a situational situation, then you probably still need some kind of pharmaceutical help, just to kind of, like you said, Carl, to get you back on an even keel. And there shouldn't be any, I think there's still a lot of stigma, and, you know, a bit of nervousness to disclose to people that you have to take medication. And I don't see what, you wouldn't be ashamed to tell someone that you need insulin,
No, exactly.
or that you need chemotherapy or anything like that. Like, it shouldn't be any different, right? And I think also for me, because I don't know what to say, my typical response, if I do see that someone's having a bad time, is say, look, I'm here if you want to talk about it. And if you don't, that's fine too. And like, if you want to make a carpet fort, or like a sofa fort or something, I'll come in with you and we'll just take some junk food in and we won't talk about anything. That's fine, you know. And if you want to be on your own, that's fine too. And I don't know if that's right or that's wrong, but it seems the most innocuous way of trying to show support.
But that's the thing, what's right and what's wrong for people is down to the individual. And I think you've just got to show your support at that point, and know that what they're going through is not anything to do with, well, it could have been caused by an interaction, but it's typically something that is not your fault, and your view on the world, but you just need to be there for them to help them through that situation and point them in the right places, really, you know, the medical and the sites that are available to you. And I think it is just that discussion. It's just being open and understanding it, that we need to be more aware of.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's being there. It's being there. I mean, as I say, an innocuous 3 words, how are you, can actually make a massive world of difference. And some people kind of feel that I'm here for you is kind of a pat sort of generic response, but actually, if that comes from somebody you know, who actually turns around to you and goes, okay, I don't fully understand what you're going through, because you're you and I'm me, but I'm here for you. Something as simple as that can just really transform a situation. It can start an opening up process of just sort of, yeah, okay, right. I am not alone. I've always known I'm not alone. I just haven't understood I'm not alone. I think that was it for me. Is you get yourself, or I get myself. I won't generalize, because it is different for other people. For me, I can get to the point where I convince myself that even though I know I'm not alone, I am alone. And I can convince myself that everybody's against me, that I'm only part of, for example, the Badger, because of the fact that I clicked on the invite link, and that if I disappeared from Badger, nobody would notice. And I can easily get myself into that mindset. And then it's realizing that actually, hold on, somebody's come alongside and said, I'm here for you. How are you? Do you want to talk? And all of a sudden, that it can all come crashing in, but in a way that then opens yourself outward to allow people in. At least,
and that was the same with me. It was getting to a point where you acknowledged it was the hardest part. And I think because you bumble along through life with without a care in the world, and you think you're never gonna suffer from mental illness, and you just carry on and everything's great, and then you just don't realize that you've spiraled down, and then there may be a trigger, there may be not, but it's just recognizing, and for others to recognize that you're different from what your normal character is, and being brave enough to then do something about it is all what I think that the mental illness, certainly in my view, is all about. And it's being brave enough to and care enough about another individual to recognize it and be not be afraid of raising it with them.
Can I ask you guys a question? Because one commonality that I've really noticed, and I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody's personal situation, but I really do strongly sense that a lot of people I know that have suffered from depression are very often the people on whom everybody else is relying. So they're the person who's the main breadwinner, or they're leading a lot of work streams, or and they're the go-to person. I think, like, for me, it's almost like that sense. They say like comedians are always like really depressed because, like, it's just innate in their personality. And I'm wondering if one becomes that sort of figurehead, or that leader, or that person that everybody relies on because you are of that persuasion, or are you, because of the situation you find yourself in, with everybody relying on you and nobody checking in with you saying, hey, thanks for all you do, hey, how are you? Is that what, does that contribute to it? I don't know, there's so many factors involved. What are your thoughts on that?
For me, I think that you've got some truth there. I think, certainly in my opinion, that from a personal point of view and from a work point of view, certainly at the time there was a lot of pressure on. There was a team below me, etc., and I wasn't really getting as much out of it as I thought I was, and it was, the lack of interaction or praise, I guess, to use a better word probably. But I don't see it as generally being like that. I think everyone is different. I think I know people that close friends who are still they're just plodding along and enjoying their life, but suffer from depression, and they don't they don't have a close family around them, you know, they're bachelors, etc. So there is, it can go across all spectrums, and I think it's that trigger point maybe, that, you know, it is just that something not quite fitting, and you don't correct it and you let it go down that route, and it can go the other way. Remember that if you overcorrect, you suddenly become out there and garish and everything else, and that's the opposite end that people don't see with any of these men. There's the negative that is seen, which is being sad and lonely, but there's a lot of people that, like the comedians, that put on this show on this front, but it doesn't take long to get back down to that bottom again, and they both have their mental connotations.
Yeah, Stephen Fry actually is very vocal about the fact that he will have phases where he's on an absolute roll and then suddenly crash. And I'm very hesitant to use the words bipolar, because I don't think you call it bipolar these days. And it's one of those where it's a constant minefield for anybody. It's not just those with robust mental health. I think anybody who has mental health challenges, struggles, battles, fights, whatever language we try to use, I think it's a challenge there, because it would be very easy for me to sit here with my lens and my perspective and overlay that on your experiences, Carl. And while there might be some commonality, what worked for me could quite possibly be the absolute worst thing that would have been for you.
Yeah.
And I think it's this thing that if you're starting from a place of not dealing with personal mental health issues, or even if you are, it's trying to understand a little bit more. I think with all these things, you mentioned Me Too movement. I mean, you can cover the whole thing: Black Lives Matter, gender imbalance, diversity and inclusion, the whole thing, accessibility. That I mean, there's just so much out there at the moment. We're never going to get 100% right. We're always going to end up using language that will have somebody turn around and go, I don't like you calling it that. 99 people might say, thank you, that was the best way of describing me. But there'll always be one person who will go, actually, no, not me. And I think personally, if the best advice I would have for somebody coming from an outside point of view is be there for the people. Just be there. And that doesn't mean constantly being their shadow and stalking, but it does mean regular check-in. It does mean just when we can get together again, when lockdowns ease and everything else, saying, right, let's grab a coffee, let's grab a beer, let's just grab a bite to eat, let's grab 5 minutes next time we're at an event together.
And I think it is being there, and it's understanding that person and not judging them, and all those things that come with being there. You know, if they want to short term be on their own, or, you know, and be away from you for 5-10 minutes, and don't expect anything else. You know, that's all that you can offer, is that solitude. but if they're asking for an interaction, etc., be there for them as well, and just take your lead from the person that's suffering. And you would do that with any other illness. You would give them the time to recuperate, and you'd interact with them and help them to go shopping, whatever else. And mental illness is the same.
Yeah. And I think actually that is a really good way for us to finish this episode. Yeah, let's because I think that is a really brilliant point to end on. So Carl, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and
no worries, thank you.
Sharing your experiences and your thoughts. I've learned stuff from just talking to you, so hopefully other people have as well. And Alison, as always, it is wonderful seeing you, my dear.
Can I just say, Mike?
You
can you say to both of you, you need to keep this going, and I think you need to keep this at the top of the most of our community and reach out to the others in our community to keep talking about it.
Thank you, Carl. I can assure you this is definitely high on the agenda for 2021, that's for sure. So, well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, listening, watching, however you are absorbing this podcast. And we will see you all soon on the next episode of The Things We Don't Talk About. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Things We Don't Talk About with Alison Mulligan and Mike Hartley.